Hello everyone and welcome to our video about choking. Just a warning, this is a longer video because there's lots of questions and concerns related to this topic and I want you to feel comfortable with the way that you're feeding your baby. And a double warning, I'm going to be talking about what choking and gagging looks like, which can be a little bit scary, so watch this video when you have the bandwidth to digest that information. So let's start off the bat with busting two feeding myths. Myth number one, your baby needs teeth to eat. This is false. Your baby does not need teeth to eat. Some babies don't develop teeth till closer to 1 year and they can still safely eat finger foods. Myth number two, baby-led weaning with finger foods causes more choking incidents than with purees. That is also false and we're going to talk about the research for that right now. So now for some science. In one study, which is the Bliss study, which is a very big baby-led weaning study, they took a fairly large group of infants as far as baby-led weaning studies go. This research is still relatively new. So they looked at 206 babies and evaluated choking and gagging episodes. So the researchers found that there was no statistical difference in choking episodes between the baby-led weaning with the finger food approach versus the traditional purees moving to the finger food approach. So some things to keep in mind about this study. So the choking episodes were parent defined. So obviously it would have been a little bit more accurate if we had healthcare providers defining choking versus gagging, but that obviously isn't possible because we can't watch all 200 infants all the time when they're eating. Of the choking episodes, 50% of these resolved before the parent intervened, and of the serious choking episodes, 2 were on milk and 1 involved a food placed directly into the infant's mouth. So the moral of the story here is that we cannot avoid all choking episodes no matter what we do, no matter how we feed our babies. The best thing that we can do is to be prepared. So I want you to think of your CPR and infant first aid course like a seatbelt. You would never take your child, hopefully, in the car without their car seat, and you should also hopefully never feed your baby without an adult present who knows what to do in the emergency situation that they have a choking incident. So now back to the research. In some of this choking research, it's also possible here that parents in the study had difficult differentiating choking from gagging and identified gagging as choking episodes. And so that's very possible, especially with the milk choking incidents. So other interesting information from the study, the baby-led weaning babies, or the ones who started directly on finger foods, they gagged significantly more than the puree babies at 6 months, but significantly less than the puree babies at age 8 months. So this suggests that because the baby-led weaning babies started with finger foods, they're more adept at quickly clearing foods from their airways than their traditional weaning with pureed counterparts, which is a benefit because we want our babies to know how to clear food from their airways. So interestingly, this study did tell us that parents are offering choking hazards to their infants. So it's very important to be aware of what constitutes a choking hazard. So for instance, choking hazards include coin-shaped foods like sliced hot dogs or sausages, raw carrots or other hard veggies, raw apples or other hard fruits, chips, popcorn, candy, nuts or seeds, including bread with whole seeds in it, but this doesn't include chia seeds or hemp hearts because those are small and don't pose a choking risk. Round grape-shaped and sized fruits or foods like whole grapes, cherry tomatoes, and even large blueberries and blackberries. So the research shows us actually that the most common choking hazard is raw apple. So we should not be feeding our infants raw apple, and we should actually not be feeding our even our toddlers sliced apples or giving them a whole apple to eat. So up until 4 years of age, big apple slices or whole apples are a choking hazard. So for babies, we can modify them. We'll talk about that in a minute. So other types of food that you should avoid are untoasted bread or anything that can form a large crumb, which basically means a giant sticky ball in your baby's mouth. So the bread might not look like a choking hazard from the get-go, but when they eat it, they kind of collect it and pool it into one big glob in their mouth, and that can then pose a choking hazard. Other things that can be a choking hazard for babies are things like globs of big sticky foods like peanut butter, or hard meats or cheeses like beef jerky, or hard Parmesan that's not sliced thin or shredded. So the good news is that many of these choking hazards can be modified to be safe for your baby, with the exception of popcorn and candy. Those can't be modified. So things like hot dogs and sausages, they can be sliced into coin shaped and then quartered from there. Grapes, cherries, tomatoes, large blackberries, those things can all be quartered. And my favorite tool for this is the OXO Tot Grape Cutter, which actually have right here for you. So this is what it looks like. You just put the grape in here and then you press this down and it will quarter it. So this is a great tool, the OXO Tot Grape Cutter. I use this for grapes and cherry tomatoes all the time. Raw carrots or apples, those can be cooked soft, so they can be sauteed, they can be baked. You can steam veggies like that, or they can also be shredded if you don't have the time to cook. Nut butters can be spread thin on toast or swirled into yogurt, oatmeal, or smoothies. And then meat can be cooked tender, like short rib or chicken thighs or salmon. And we have a sleeping baby. Okay, I will be back. He fell asleep. Okay, baby's down at the monitor. So let's get back to the video. So a good test, and honestly this is based more in clinical practice than actual research, but a lot of clinicians use this. So a good test to see if a food is safe for your baby is the finger squish test. So if you can squeeze a food in between your fingers, it's likely soft enough for them to eat, because baby's jaw can exert the same force or more than your fingers can, meaning that they can basically gum the food into smaller pieces for them to chew and swallow. Now it's important to evaluate each food on your baby's plate and make a decision based on your baby's developmental abilities and your good judgment, but that's a good test to use as a starting place. So what else can you do to prevent choking? Probably one of the biggest, or there's actually two things here. One, don't place food directly into your baby's mouth. We want them to put the food pieces into their mouth on their own. So number two, do not finger sweep. So finger sweep should be reserved for during the actual process of the infant Heimlich maneuver, which, if you don't know what I'm talking about, please take a CPR and infant first aid class to learn more about that. So when you do a finger sweep, meaning you stick your finger in their mouth to pull out food, you actually risk pushing the food further back into your child's mouth and causing a choking incident. So avoid putting food directly into their mouth and avoid finger sweeps. If your child takes a too big bite, encourage them to chew with an exaggerated motion, like chew, 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 or encourage them to spit it out. Spit it out with an exaggerated motion. Again, your baby will likely take two big bites at some point. Heck, sometimes adults take two big bites. We want to teach them what to do in this situation if that should occur. So if this becomes a problem, cut up the food smaller, or only place enough on their tray at one time that you're comfortable with them putting in their mouth. If that means you're sitting there and like putting a little bit of food on their tray and they put it in their mouth, and then you put more food in their tray and they put it in their mouth, so be it. That might be what you have to do to teach your child what is the appropriate amount of food to have in their mouth at one time. If your baby pockets food chronically, meaning they store food in their cheeks like a chipmunk and don't swallow it, a speech therapist evaluation may be really helpful for you here. So finally, let's talk about the difference between choking and gagging. So gagging is a natural reflex that helps your child clear food out of a place in their mouth where, without any intervention, it may intervene, or it may block their airway. Choking is an emergency situation where food or something else blocks or enters the airway, preventing the child from breathing. So gagging is good. We want our kids to gag because babies who gag know how to clear their airway, which is a really important skill. If your baby were to get a food in their mouth that they shouldn't have, or even a non-food object in their mouth, we want them to be able to spit it out and know how to move it from the back of their throat to the front of their mouth to spit it out. That's a really important safety skill to learn. So most of the time, a gag looks like an open mouth, tongue out and thrusting forward, and a loud gagging or coughing noise. Okay, so most of the time, gagging is loud, not always. But keep in mind that gagging is scary, especially if you're a new parent and you've never fed a baby before. It does make your heart skip a beat, even for me. But the best thing that you could do in this situation is to stay calm as much as possible and encourage your baby in a positive voice. So if you see your baby gagging, they're showing all the signs that they're still able to breathe, they're moving the food forward, and they're just trying to get it out on their own. Encourage them with a positive voice. You got this, you can do it, spit it out. And that positive environment is going to be really beneficial for you and your baby. If you startle your baby by like grabbing them or sticking your finger in their mouth really quick, they might go and inhale, and that could make the situation even worse. So obviously, if you think your baby is choking, do grab them out of their high chair. But if you notice them gagging, do your best to let them work it out on their own. Most of the time for choking looks like a silent baby, a look of fear or terror on their face, no sound or a high-pitched whistle because their airway is almost all blocked, but there could be some small space for air to pass. A red face that progresses to purple and blue, and oftentimes you'll see the lips discolored first. So gagging, their face can look red. Choking, their face will look red too, but it won't clear and it will start to turn, their baby's face or lips will start to turn purple. So now some myths about choking and gagging. So choking babies don't always turn blue. There's a saying that's like loud and red, let them deal with it, and quiet and blue, they're choking. So yes, if they're quiet and blue, they're choking. But if their face turns red, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not choking. And keep in mind that in both situations, it's harder to tell the color of your child's face with a darker complexion. So don't just rely on the color of your kid's face to discern between choking and gagging incidents. So again, in both choking and gagging, your child's face might turn red right away and their eyes might water, but any blue color does indicate that your child is most likely choking. So if your baby is choking, their airway can be partially or fully obstructed. Their airway doesn't have to be fully obstructed for it to be considered a choking incident. So if you hear air, they could still be choking. So like the phrase, if it's loud, it's gagging, and if it's silent, it's choking. Choking doesn't necessarily have to be silent. There can be like a whistling sound, or the airway can be partially blocked. So typically in choking, they will be silent and they won't be able to cough. That can be a good indicator, though not always. And a high-pitched squeaking or wheezing can be a sign of a partially obstructed airway. Now, your choking baby, again, won't always be blue, especially in the case, I want to really hammer this home, of babies with babies of color or a darker complexion. So it's really important to recognize other signs of choking, like the sounds that they're making, the expression on their face, can you hear any air passing, as well as the color of their face and their lips. So now I'm going to leave you with a quote from a fellow mama that I've talked to, and she said, whether it's at 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, I've got to get past the choking fear and I might as well do it now. So I bring this up because your mental health and stress is very important as a mom and as a parent. And you bring that to the meal with your kiddo during your baby's feeding journey. But I'm gonna give you a tough love moment here. I can tell you that if you're nervous about choking now, it's not just gonna disappear because your baby gets older. Most moms, myself included, get nervous at the thought of their baby gagging and choking, and that's normal to feel that way. But the best thing that you can do is arm yourself with information and the skills you need to safely address that situation should it come up. So that includes things like this class and CPR or first aid certification. That's really, really important. So connect yourself with a support system, lean on them when you're stressed, and know that you don't have to start with finger foods right away. Your baby can be perfectly healthy starting with purees and transitioning to finger foods. However, regardless of when you start, most parents have a fear at some point about choking. So if you're starting at 6 months, you may have a fear about choking. And then if you're transitioning them to finger foods at 9 months, you may have a fear about choking. So by waiting on finger foods, if you're doing that just because you're afraid of choking, you're just delaying that experience and that fear of that experience. So you're not necessarily going to get rid of that. So if anyone on social media or anywhere else though makes you feel bad about the way you feed your baby, unfollow, kick them to the curb, remove them from the experience of feeding your baby, because your stress level and your mental health does matter. And if you want to start with purees because that's the best decision for you and that's the thing that makes you most comfortable with your feeding your baby, then you do that. Your baby can be perfectly healthy. You don't have to start on finger foods first. But regardless of when you do start on finger foods, I want you to be armed with information about how to handle a choking and gagging incident. And that means educating yourself with things like this video and making sure that you take a CPR and first aid class. So that's it for the choking video. Happy feeding.